Hi there, I'm going to do a review for Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This movie came out in 2003, directed by Peter Jackson. Of course, based on the novel by J.R. Tolkien. And this movie here is kind of like the culmination of the three Lord of the Rings movies, of course. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's the big, they're big epic movies. So a lot of things have happened. This one here is particularly longer than the other two. This one's over 4 hours long. Um, and it's basically about how Frodo and Sam are heading into Mordor, and what else is happening? Yeah, Frodo and Sam heading into Mordor. Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli are dealing with the problems of, and the White Wizard. Was it White Wizard? There we go. Gandalf are all heading into dealing with the world of men. The king of Gondor. Of course, Aragorn's got to take up his crown position. He's got to decide whether or not he's going to do this. And this is, yeah, it's quite the epic movie. I believe there's another storyline in there, but the basic point is that Mordor is pushing its forces against the level of Gondor, and therefore the big epic fight of men versus the epic fight of their time. Um, it's epic movie making. It's a huge movie. Huge amount of stuff in this film, and that's really the point. Is that the fight against Gondor is meant to draw attention away from what Frodo and Sam are doing with Mordor. Because they're trying to get the One Ring to Mount Doom, because of course they gotta melt this thing down. This is not an easy quest, of course, because Frodo and Sam picked up Gollum in the previous movie, and Gollum is becoming a bit of a problem because he is helping to turn Sam against Frodo, or Frodo against Sam, however you want to put it. Basic point is that there's a problem in the brewing. There's a lot of other things going on here. Basically, the world of King of the dealings with the Gondor is that they're the one primary castle, the one primary world of men. Mordor is going to attempt, Sauron is going to attempt a major offensive. And of course, the other group of people are all trying to figure out how to get the appropriate equipment. But no, Aragorn and all them, the movie starts basically with Aragorn and Legolas and stuff. They're over at the other king's palace, trying to deal with um, the other world of men. The world of men are kind of disconnected right now. There's a couple different kingdoms. They do not light anything. It's kind of a problem because there's not really a true alliance there. See, the problem is with this world is that there's not seen to be a true alliance between men, dwarves, and elves, and more or less, yeah. This, yeah. The one of the people that got thrown away. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this movie. Aragorn's company is included by the King of Rohan. Yeah, Rohan's forces have to get to Gondor because, of course, Gondor doesn't have any prepared proper defenses, any army, and Gondor, whereas Rohan kind of is trying to collect the army that they got. They're trying to get a sortie because Gondor's been led by a steward that's not really doing his job, and Rohan is trying to get the king of Rohan is trying to get forces drawn up. Of course, he knows he can't get enough, and they end up with something like 7,000 forces, 7,000 troops on horseback. They know this isn't going to be enough. Although it does a pretty good job when you actually get to the battle, considering where they're fighting and what they're doing, they end up being just good enough. Um, the biggest thing is that this still has a problem because, of course, they don't have the force strength, they don't have enough utility. Um, and the whole point is that in Gondor, Gandalf is trying to lead that force, and of course the steward's not helping because he is on a one-way mission to deal with his sons. Of course, one of which he apparently hates, and that's kind of like a good chunk of the story. Inevitably, the king has to arrive. Aragorn has to decide whether he's going to be the king, and he sort of does take up the mantle. They also had found the sword of Gondor, the sword of men, and they put it back together, and they give it to Aragorn. And there's a few other things. There's a backstory, a bit of a backstory involving the dead. Apparently, the dead. There's an army of the dead that hasn't finalized. It hasn't had a chance to finalize its lives. They're all dead. They're all sitting in a castle. And the joke is, of course, there's a old deal with men that hasn't been dealt with properly over the last quite a few long time, hundreds to thousands of years, and that deal has to be dealt with. So in the end, they end up fighting. Aragorn and Legolas end up having to go and waken up that old army because they know that the forces of Rohan aren't big enough, so they decide to enlist the help of the army of the dead. But this army of dead isn't like a zombie army. This isn't quite the same as Game of Thrones. This is actually an army of ghosts, more or less. But Rohan's army ends up forging a pretty good sized force for dealing with this. Of course, Mordor has an overwhelming force, but I think the problem with comparing Mordor with other places is that Mordor is kind of its own separate thing. Like, they don't have good combination forces. They're not well disciplined. It's an army of orcs and orcai and goblins. Like, there's not a lot to talk about there because it's basically just a disorganized army, and they're basically just trotting their way out of the situation, and the result will be that they'll find out how this is going to go, and Sauron is desperate for the ring, of course, but to keep the eyes away from Frodo and Sam as they enter Mordor and go to Mount Doom, they of course enlist that. They have to set up a decoy. I think that's the only real problem with this movie is that, well, actually, the only real problem with all three of these movies is that there's a lot of focus on the men. I understand these days that the novels themselves are more focused on the hobbits than on the men, whereas these movies, they seem to be very much an army of it's more or less the hobbits that do the heavy lifting while the world of men goes and has their fight. The fights that happen between the men don't last very long in the novels, and the novels is very much being particular about the hobbits. Of course, when there is dealings between the biggest problem I find is that the Smeagol Gollum situation. Actually, we are given a bit of backstory in the extended edition of this movie because there's 3 extended editions. The extended edition reveals that's what happened between Smeagol and his old friend when he found the Ring of Power, and I do find it amusing the backstory in the Ring of Power, but yeah, the ring gets discovered, and of course, it's got these alluring tendencies. It makes everybody want to get it and return it. But I think that's the only problem is like the Ring of Power. What will it mean? What would it mean if Sauron got back his ring? What would it mean? What would he do? Um, it's not entirely clear what would happen to this world. And everybody would be dead, but I guess that's what's supposed to happen. Nonetheless, no, they end up going in with a pretty good battle sequence here involving Gondor and the army of Mordor. And Mordor's army, I would say, is, you know, what, 200,000? 150? I'm not sure. It's a pretty good sized force. But again, it's disorganized. It's not properly engaged. It's basically chaotic. It's kind of like a chaotic evil army, so it doesn't really work in the end because there's no force structure, there's no discipline. They're only disciplined enough to know that they got to go against a force. And then they're dealing with and just after the army that they had going fights, a bunch of elephants showed up at the midway point. I'm not sure that this elephant army is supposed to be the end all, but they sure seem, for a moment there, they seem a little bit surprised. And then once they get their forces kind of recouped, it becomes obvious that that elephant army is not quite as awesome as they thought. Nonetheless, yeah, when the main force gets destroyed or gets disorganized and runs, another force comes out of Mordor, and they're like the last straw in the fight. But in the end, Frodo and Sam get to the Mount Doom. There's a lot of different places to go. Oh yeah, the big subplot, of course, is Frodo and Sam get into a place where they meet the spider. There's a giant spider, and Frodo ends up getting bitten by this spider and wrapped up and stuff. And that's sort of where it's a good, beautiful visual effect. I mean, that's one thing about these movies is that they do a very good job with visual effects and special effects. Is that there's really they show really good production. This is something I think even modern movies lack is the feeling that it's a lived-in universe. But this one, yeah, Frodo deals with the spider and then ends up getting into Mordor after all. The whole task of getting rid of the ring is pretty monumental. It's a moment. It's all been building to that. You know, it's kind of funny how this is only 3 movies and it has been building to this, and they do end up having this big moment where Smeagol gets a hold of the ring, but ends up falling into the pit of lava. So he gets his one last wish, and then he's gone. And I guess he got what he needed to get because, of course, he doesn't have much to talk about. There's not much to him. Nonetheless, it's a pretty good movie. It works out well enough. They have a lot of there's a lot of stuff that happens in this movie. There's a lot of things that go on. The one female princess was able to join the ranks of the men. She disguised herself as a common soldier, and of course get some moments. But nonetheless, this movie ends up the culmination of the Lord of the Rings franchise. And overall, they're pretty good movies. I don't know if they're perfect. I don't know if they're as good as, say, the Star Wars movies. They're a different kind of film. They're a different kind of fantasy. Nonetheless, they do the job, and they do feel epic. And it's a very epic movie. All in all, it's a pretty good movie. And it does its job. And the visual effects are great, and the storytelling is actually pretty good. So yeah, not much to complain about with these movies. They're really good movies. So Lord of the Rings: Return of the King.